Welcome back to the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we delve further into the wisdom of meditation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Geoffrey DeGraff. We deeply appreciate your support. Please take a moment to like and share this audiobook, helping us expand its reach and granting more individuals access to its profound insights. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for instant notifications when new content is released. Together, we can disseminate the teachings of meditation and mindfulness, fostering a community dedicated to enlightenment and inner peace. Your participation in our mission to make these transformative teachings universally accessible is truly invaluable. Let's begin today's reading. Free to choose. July 4, 2015. One of the Buddha's insights on the night of his awakening was that the universe just goes around and around, life goes around and around, sometimes up, sometimes down. Where it comes from, he says, is inconceivable, and it's capable of going on continually as long as there's craving. As long as there's consciousness that feeds on craving, which gives rise to more craving, the process can just keep on going infinitely. It's not going anywhere in particular and it doesn't serve any purpose. Now, that insight can be depressing if you think about it in one way, but it's liberating if you think about it in another way. That you're not here to serve a part of some larger universal purpose. You can give your own meaning to your life. You're free to choose what you want to do with your life, what you want to do with the abilities you have. The way the Buddha used that realization was to focus in on the problem of sewering. We each have our own sewerings. They're part of our experience that we don't share with anyone else. You can sit and look at somebody's sewer, and you can feel sympathy for them, but you don't actually feel their pain. And no one else can feel your pain. The Buddha's basic message is that you can focus on that pain in sewering as a worthwhile issue, and on getting rid of that pain as a worthwhile goal. Other people may say that you should hang around and help them with whatever issues they want to deal with in the world, but the Buddha said you don't have to. You can deal with your main issue. You can put a total end to your sewering, and end total happiness. It would be nice if we could clean up everybody else's sewerings for them, but we can't. Each person's sewering is the result of his or her own lack of skill. That's one of the meanings of avidya. You can't make other people skillful, but you can develop skills on your own, and you can use those skills to deal with this issue, because each of us does have this area of our awareness that nobody else can know. You look at the blue sky, and everybody agrees that the sky is blue, but how do you know that other people's blue is the same as your blue? Even something as basic as that we don't share. That's not really a big issue, of course, but the big issue inside this area of your awareness is the fact that you are sewering, and the mind is causing itself to sewer, and yet the sewering isn't necessary. The Buddha is saying that you're free to learn how to put an end to it. You can devote your time to putting an end to it, and it's an honorable use of your time. It's an honorable thing to get out of this cycle of unskillfulness in sewering, regardless of how much the world may tell us that we have to hang around and help them with their issues or their causes or whatever. If you want to be generous, you can help, but there comes a point where all the causes you might GHT for can't help you when aging comes, when illness comes, when death comes. And the Buddha is saying, go ahead. You are free to focus on how to solve that issue, so that when aging, illness, and death come, you won't sewer. That's an independence that's really worthwhile. So look what you're doing right now. See what you're doing that's unskillful, that's causing unnecessary stress, unnecessary sewering, and work on that, remembering that if you keep on coming back, you may be able to help people with some things, but you're also putting a burden on others. To begin with, you're putting a burden on your parents. One of the traditional parts of an ordination in Thailand is a chant before the ordination ceremony that sometimes can go on for hours depending on how much the parents want to hear it, teaching the young Naga, the young monk-to-be, about all the sewerings that his mother went through in raising him. Most of the chant deals with the sewerings she endured while she was pregnant with him. This is to give rise to a sense of gratitude and a desire to help pay her back. One of the ways to repay that debt traditionally is to ordain and to dedicate the merit to her. But the chant should also be an incentive to say to yourself, I don't want to come back because I'm going to cause pain to somebody else. Somebody is going to have to carry me around in her womb for 9 months. Think of all the time and energy that parents give to raising their children. This thought can give rise to a sense of gratitude, but it also gives rise to a sense of samvega. When the Buddha talks about how many mothers you've had, he said that it's hard to envy someone who hasn't been your mother at some point. It's hard to envy someone who hasn't been your father, someone who hasn't been your son or daughter, brother, sister. We've all been through this in all the various combinations many, many, many times. And as he says, the proper reaction to that is to want to get out. You want to envy release from this, because it's oppressive when you think about it. Today I was looking at the internet. Tricycle has put my article on Samvega online, and one of the comments was, this is why Mahayana had to develop, to get past this very narrow view that the world is zuering. After all, surely the pleasures of walking in the woods and sipping a cup of tea are not temporary pleasures. I read that and I kept thinking, this must be a satire. How can anyone sincerely think like this? If you think that this is what life is all about, that this is all there is, and you might as well just learn how to accept it well, that's one way of looking at it, but it's not the wisest. The Buddha said, no, you don't have to accept this. You don't have to come back. You are free to put an end to this zuring that you feel, and that nobody else can feel for you, and nobody else can take away for you. People can soothe the pain a little bit, but when you're really zuring, the only things that are going to get you past it are the skills you learn. You learn the skills of vijja so that you replace the avijja that causes zuring, and the Buddha is owing to teach you those skills. He sets them out and says very clearly, this is how it's done. Some of the instructions are easy to follow, others are hard to follow, but they're all worthwhile. You know the analogy he gives. If you could make a deal that every morning for 100 years they would stab you with 100 spears, and every noon they would stab you with another 100 spears, and every evening another 100 spears, 300 spears a day for 100 years, but you'd be guaranteed awakening at the end, he said it would be a deal worth making. You wouldn't even feel that the awakening came through hardship. The freedom that comes, the sense of total relief that comes when you're past zuring, is that valuable and all-encompassing. Even with just stream entry. He says that the amount of zuring left for someone who's a stream enterer is like a little bit of dirt under your fingernail, as compared to the dirt in the entire earth, which is like the amount of zuring left for those who haven't reached that point. That's a lot of zuring. So this is our independence. Our ability to focus on this part of our awareness that we don't share with anyone else, and to straighten it out so that we don't have to feel the zuring that weighs each of us down. It's an independence with a double meaning. 1. You are free to focus on this issue. The universe doesn't have any larger purpose for you to which you have to subsume your desire for happiness in service of some larger purpose. And 2. When you master these skills, you really are free. There's nothing that weighs the mind down at all. From that point forward, what you have left in life you can give to others to help them learn these skills as well. That's the kindest thing you can do. This is why we pass these things on. We've found the value that comes from following the Buddha's teachings, and we want to preserve them so that other people can enjoy that value as well. So for this hour, you're free to focus on the problem you enjoy inside. These opportunities don't come easily. All too often, we have lots of other responsibilities in the world, but at the moment you've got this freedom, so make the most of it. What we have in common. December 21, 2016. We come from lots of different backgrounds. What holds us together is our desire to practice the Dhamma. A couple of years after Ajahn Fuang passed away, a group of people came from Bangkok and asked me if Ajahn Fuang had done any amazing, miraculous things while he was alive. They were hoping to hear about his psychic powers, his ability to read minds, his foreknowledge of events, that kind of thing. And although I could have told them plenty of stories on those topics, I thought it would be more useful to tell them something even more amazing. That even though he was Thai and I was American when we communicated, the fact that he was Thai and I was an American didn't seem to matter. It was always just one human being to another. I thought that was amazing. And that wasn't true just with Ajahn Fuang. The people who came to the monastery, especially when we were working together on building the Chiti, building the Buddha image, had a very strong sense of extended family, a lot of camaraderie, a lot of fellowship, and I was simply part of the family. But as I got to know the people, I began to realize that, when we weren't working on Dhamma projects or talking about the Dhamma, when they started talking about their backgrounds, they were all coming from places and attitudes very foreign to me, not only in terms of their culture, but also in terms of their social and economic status. They were people with whom I otherwise would have probably never connected. But the fact that we were able to step out of our backgrounds and look at them from the point of view of the Dhamma made all of the differences okay and understandable. Familiar, even because everybody was willing to step out. This is what the Dhamma does. It helps us step out of our culture. Ajahn Mun's favorite teaching was the customs of the noble ones. He was accused of not following traditional Thai customs or traditional Lao customs, and in response he'd always say, "Those are the customs of people with dilemma," a comment that applies to any country's customs. He was interested in putting an end to sewering, which meant becoming a noble one, and to do that required that he follow the customs of the noble ones, the culture of the noble ones. After all, the problem of sewering is pre-cultural. Even before we know we have a culture, we're already experiencing pain, getting upset over physical pain and mental pain. As soon as we start coming out of the womb, there it is. Pain. It's a problem we've been relating to ever since. So the extent to which we focus on that as our priority is what brings us together regardless of our backgrounds. The Buddha did have an appreciation of diversity, but the kind of diversity he appreciated was that of diverse talents. He gave a list of his preeminent monk, nun, layman, and laywoman disciples, pointing out the distinctive talents or virtues of each. Each had something distinctive to offer to the group in terms of wisdom, harmoniousness, or the sacrifice he or she made on the path. But it was all for the same purpose, which added to the honor of the group as a whole. So here we are, coming from many different backgrounds ourselves. Different parts of the world, different strata of society. What brings us together is the fact that we have a common aspiration, a common goal. We focus on the Buddha's analysis of sewering, which is the same for everybody. He focused on what we all have in common, in terms of why we're sewering. We may be clinging to different things, but the clinging itself is the problem, not the things. And the dynamic of clinging and the dynamic of putting an end to it is the same for everybody. There are minor differences in terms of the particulars of your clinging, and these are things that we all have to work out for ourselves. But the basic structure is the same. That was the Buddha's genius. He came from a particular stratum of society. Indian society, the noble warrior class. But his analysis of sewering, the causes of sewering, and the end of sewering, was not limited to India or the noble warrior caste. It was simply a matter of how the mind, every mind, works. So as we focus on this, it's what keeps us working together. Belonging together. The Buddha talked about how a group can stay together. We look at our society now and everything seems to be tearing apart. It's good to think about how we can put it back together. There are 6 qualities in all. The rest 3 have to do with goodwill. The Buddha could have stated all of them simply as one factor, goodwill, but I think he wanted to emphasize goodwill, goodwill, goodwill. This is what underlies everything. A wish for true happiness, a wish that everybody can enjoy true happiness, a happiness that harms no one. So, 1. You express goodwill in your actions. 2. You express goodwill in your words. 3. You express goodwill in your thoughts. As long as we're extending thoughts of goodwill to one another, it's a lot easier to live together, to sympathize with one another's desire for happiness across our cultural differences. The 4th quality is generosity. If you have something to share, you share it with the group. This creates a sense of camaraderie. I have a student who, years back, was living up northwestern Thailand, out in the woods. And there was a sizable group of monks scattered around in the woods. Once every month or so, someone would come and bring provisions for them. And as long as everybody was sharing, they were happy. But they found out that the monk who was looking after the storehouse for the provisions was holding extra portions all for himself. And immediately, there was conflict in the group because of that. So the lesson is, when you have something to share, you give it. That's what creates and cements a bond of fellowship. Then the last two qualities are holding virtue in common and right view in common. As long as we're all holding by the precepts, we can all trust one another. When we're not lying or sneaking with things, it's so much easier to live with one another. The same with having views in common. We start with the views of the Buddha's teachings on karma, that you do have choices as to how to act, and that different actions have different consequences, based on the quality of the intention behind the action. So you want to be careful about how you act. That's the essence of right view right there. It doesn't require that you be Buddhist in order to believe it. I've run into some nominal Buddhists who thought that their actions were totally determined by their genes, which means that deep down inside they don't feel that they're responsible for what they do. It's hard to live with someone who thinks like that. If you want to live together, you have to admit, I do make choices, and my choices are going to have consequences, so I'd better be careful. As long as everybody shares that view together, we can live with one another. Basically, what it comes down to is that we all have the same goal in common. We are trying to head to the same place, to the end of suffering, and the same basic ideas of what's required to get there. The Buddha talks about people who are born in darkness, people who are born in brightness, people who go in darkness, and people who go in brightness. He works out all the permutations, i.e., you can come in darkness and go in darkness, come in darkness and go in brightness, come in brightness and go in darkness, or come in brightness and go in brightness. Coming in darkness means starting out life in a situation where the family is poor, it's not educated, and it holds to wrong view. In other words, you're born into really difficult circumstances, as far as your ability to nd and practice the Dhamma. Coming in brightness is when the circumstances are easy. But there are people born in brightness who go in darkness. In other words, they behave in ways that are going to pull them down. And there are people who are born either in brightness or darkness who are going in the bright direction. Observing the precepts, training the mind. And that's what matters. Where you're going, not where you're coming from. As the Buddha said, his teaching is essentially a path. And the image of the path means basically that we're going someplace. The goal is what matters. Even as we're sitting here focusing on the present moment, it's not just the present moment that's at stake here. What comes afterwards is at stake as well. There are ways of finding happiness in the present moment that are going to be okay for the present, but they're going to turn into something else down the line. You don't want those. Sometimes there's pain in the present moment, but you learn how to relate to it in the proper way, so that it actually leads to something good down the line. So the question always is, where do these things go? That's what we're focusing on. And having a sense that we're all heading in the same direction is what enables us to live with one another. We're all trying to put an end to suffering. We're trying to see our sufferings, the particulars of our sufferings within the framework that the Buddha provided. We have that common framework that enables us to live with the differences in where we come from, so that even though they're there, they don't get in the way. We're not trying to obliterate them, but ultimately, they don't matter because we're focusing on something that matters more, something that everyone has in common. We're all suffering from our own actions, and we all want to learn how not to do that. We realize that our suffering from our own actions doesn't stop just with us. It makes us a burden on other people, too. This is why practicing the Dhamma is a gift, both to ourselves and other people. It's one of those forms of generosity that allows us to live together, so that our differences don't scrape up against one another. And as for whatever special talents we may have to owe to the group, to owe to the practice, they're all welcome because we're all headed in the same direction. For your bean tea here and now. August 5, 2015. When we meditate, we're working on a skill. How to bring the mind into the present moment in a way that's alert and quiet at the same time. You come to the breath because that's your anchor in the present moment, and you try to stay here. To stay here solidly, guru out how to keep the mind interested in the breath. This is one of the reasons why Ajahn Lee teaches that you work with the breath energies. Notice how you feel the breath in the chest, how you feel the breath in the abdomen, how you feel it in your shoulders, your arms, your legs. Breath here, being the energy that allows the air to come in and out of the lungs, more than the air itself. This energy out can be anywhere. As you get more acquainted with this breath energy, you begin to realize that there are lots of other breath energies in the body, and that they can be beneficial for both body and mind. If you have any chronic illnesses, this can be your beachhead. Getting familiar with the breath. For example, if you've got a chronic pain in your foot or your leg, think of the breath energy going down the back, out the leg, out through the foot, out to the toes, and out through the toes. Doing this improves the circulation there, and the general energy out gets improved. Things can actually get better. Now, as you experiment, you'll end that in some cases, working with the breath doesn't have much of an impact on some problems of the body, but you'll be surprised how many it does have an impact on. That's one way you can get interested in the ow of the breath, and in wanting to stay with the breath. Then there's the realization that the present moment is where you're creating soaring for the mind, and you don't have to. If you want to see that soaring, how you're creating it, so that you can put an end to it, you've got to stay right here. So that gives you even more motivation to stay here. And as with any skill, as we're working on this, we end that sometimes there's too much eart, sometimes there's not enough. Sometimes things are discovered by indirection. In other words, you see something out of the corner of your eye that you didn't expect. But you do that by having a regular regimen to follow. When you stick with that regimen, you begin to see minor variations and little subtle things you otherwise would have missed. It's like a bus driver who drives the same route day after day after day. As he gets used to the basic features of the route, he begins to notice slight changes here and there, in the road, on the sidewalk, in the buildings he drives past. If he didn't drive there every day, he wouldn't notice the slight changes. This is why we keep coming back to our basic meditation topic. As we keep coming back, we gradually see more clearly what we're doing as we come back. We also see more clearly what we're doing when we wander or are getting ready to wander. That allows us to head things at the pass. In some cases, problems can be solved by approaching things systematically. In others, they can be solved only if you've tried everything you could think of, and then, if nothing works, you just stop and watch for a bit. Allow things to run on their own for a while. But you're not giving up, you're just being strategic. Obviously, there's something that you're missing. Perhaps the way you're framing the issue to yourself is wrong. So you want to put that frame down and watch for a bit. Be open to different possibilities. When you catch something new, okay, try that out. Pick that up as your approach. But always, as with any skill, it's not only the indirection and the balance that work. Sometimes you've just got to put in the eart. You put in time, you observe, and you apply lessons you've learned from the Dhamma you've heard. There's a tendency in the forest tradition to take some of the Buddha's basic teachings on everyday Dhamma and see how they can be applied to the practice of meditation. One very basic teaching lists the recommendations the Buddha gave on how to work for your own bean tea in this lifetime. It's pretty basic stuff. 1. Be industrious and take initiative in your work. 2. When you've done your proper work and have gotten some income from it, you're vigilant in looking after what you've gained. You don't throw things away, you're not careless about them. 3. You hang around with the right people who won't lead you astray. And 4. You conduct your life in a way that's appropriate for your income. In other words, you're not too stingy and you're not too extravagant. You're not too miserly, And yet you don't waste what you've got. You try to find just the right balance between working, denying yourself the pleasures you may want, and then supplying yourself with some of those pleasures as they're appropriate. These are basic good instructions for how to lead your life so as to reap happiness in the present lifetime. Take initiative in your work, look after your gains and take good care of what you've got, be careful of who you hang out with, and live your life in a balanced way. These same principles apply to meditation. To begin with, you've got to take initiative. You're sitting here and your mind is not settling down. You have to ask yourself, what's wrong? And try things out. Where are you focused in the body? Is your focus the right place to be focused right now? There are lots of places where you could be focused in the body: the tip of the nose, the middle of the forehead, in your palate, in the middle of the head, in your throat, your chest, your abdomen. If you find that focusing up in the head puts a lot of pressure up there, well, move your focus down. If you're focused down in the body and you find that you're getting drowsy, move your focus back up. Then look at the breath. How are you breathing? Is this the best way you could be breathing right now? Sometimes the body seems to have a way of knowing how to breathe, and sometimes it's totally clueless. In other words, the body left to its own devices can sometimes get into some really weird breath rhythms. So sometimes you listen to the body and what it seems to want to do, and other times you have to push things in another direction. Back in the days when I had migraines, occasionally I'd get into a cycle where the way I was breathing was aggravating the migraine, and the migraine was aggravating the breath. To get out of that cycle, I had to very consciously breathe in a way that was not at all pleasant. I had to LL up the abdomen as much as possible, expand the abdomen in all directions as much as possible, breathing long for quite a while. And even though it wasn't pleasant, it would get me out of the unhealthy breath cycle and help alleviate the migraine. So sometimes you have to push things in another direction, against what the body seems to be wanting to do. Again, you learn this by trial and error. Which means that you have to take the initiative in trying to figure things out and experimenting with different approaches. Read the instructions in the book, give them a try, and if they don't work, you ask yourself, okay, where do I make adjustments? The next step is that, once you've got something good, you don't throw it away. When you're sitting here and the mind nearly settles down, you do your best to maintain that sense of ease, that sense of stability. There's a part of the mind that may say, well, I've had enough now and I can move on to something else. That kind of enough is not enough. You want to stay here. You want to learn how to make staying here a skill. You're not here to just give yourself a little hit of pleasure. You're here because you want to see the present moment continuously, because this is where things are going to come up. The stress ensuing that weigh down the mind come from your present actions. So you want to catch those actions in the act, and you want to keep your gaze steady, so that when unexpected things appear, you're here to see them. That's being vigilant in the course of your meditation. When you leave meditation, try not to fully leave. In other words, when you get up from here, you don't have to spill your concentration all over the ur. You carry it with you in the same way you'd carry a bowl full of oil or water. Try not to let it drip. Maintain a sense of balance and poise as you get up and walk around. That'll keep you connected with the breath. And as you're connected with the breath, sometimes interesting things will come up as you're getting up, leaving the meditation, walking away. So again, don't throw away the possibility of seeing something unexpected during those unexpected times. It's so easy to have the attitude, well, the time to meditate is over, and I'll meditate a bit more before I go to bed tonight, but in the meantime you've dropped things. So try not to drop things. Look after them, maintain them. As for admirable friends, this of course refers to the different voices in your mind. The voices that are on the side of greed, aversion, and delusion don't advertise themselves as greed, aversion, and delusion's henchmen, but they are. You have to learn how to recognize them. Ajahn Suwat used to say that our problem is that we see pain as our enemy and craving as our friend. It's actually the other way around. If you learn how to get intimate with pain, you're going to be able to understand it and being tea from it, so in that way it's your friend. As for your cravings, you have to learn how to put a question mark against what they say. So be very careful about who you hang out with inside. And now with the principle of a balanced livelihood. We're meditating here both for clarity and for ease. There are times when the mind really needs just to plug in with a really comfortable breath and stay there without having to think much of anything else, because it needs the rest, it needs to regain its energies. But there will come a point when you can pull out of your concentration a little bit. Don't pull all the way out, pull out a little bit and ask yourself, what's going on in the mind? What am I latching onto? What am I doing right now that's causing some unnecessary stress? In other words, ask yourself questions about the process of what the mind is doing right now. When you learn how to balance these two things, the drive for pleasure and the questioning, that's how the meditation can maintain itself. Your concentration leads to discernment, and your discernment leads to more concentration. They work together. Just be careful, though, when you're going for the pleasure, that you don't abandon the breath. This is something that's all too easy, especially when there are people out there telling you that that's what you've got to do. I was talking to someone this morning who was saying that he had been listening to teachers saying that if you want to get into deeper jhana, you abandon the breath and go jumping into the pleasure. Well, the pleasure is made steady by being steadily with the breath, either the in and out breath or the background breath energies in the body. If you abandon the cause, everything begins to blur out. If you want to get solidly into concentration, stay with the breath and just allow it to grow more subtle. Even when the in and out breath grows still, there's still a breath energy in the body, like a buzz in your nerves. That can be enough to keep you grounded if you've developed a full body awareness so that you don't go drifting away. So even as you realize, okay, this is a time when I really need to just settle in and be quiet, you still got to be vigilant. You've got to look after what you've got, protect it. At the same time, when you're asking questions of the mind, don't go too far away from your concentration. If the analysis starts heading away from the present moment, you're just going into perceptions. Remember that the questions should always be related to what you're doing right here, right now. This is true for all meditation methods. When you're analyzing the body parts, the questions are, what are the perceptions I'm forming right now? What are they doing to the mind? The perceptions that you're using in your analysis. You want to learn how to see which kinds of perceptions are there for the sake of saying, I want this to be beautiful, and the ones that say, I want this to be unappealing. What's the choice aiming at? Who is making the choice? You want to look back into the mind. It's the same with the breath. You want to learn to look at what the Buddha calls the process of fabrication going on in the mind. That's where the insight comes. It's right here as you're doing the concentration. So maintain this balance between going for the pleasure and going for the insight. They can't be two radically separated things. They have to come together if they're really going to give good results. So this is one of the ways you can take a very basic teaching the Buddha, basically telling people how to end some success in the present life, get some wealth, and being tea from it, and apply it to the wealth of your concentration, the wealth of your meditation. Have initiative. Be vigilant in protecting the good things you've got. Be very careful about who you hang out with. And try to end the right balance between your desire for pleasure and your desire for knowledge. This way your concentration will develop in a way that will be tea you right here, right now, in this present life. And it will have a good impact on into the future as well. In alignment. December 24, 2014. Ajahn Lee used to say that when you sit up straight in meditation, not leaning to the left or the right, forward or backward, you want to make that a symbol for your mind. The mind is sitting up straight, too. It's not leaning forward toward the future, back toward the past, left to things you like, right to things you don't like. So try to get your mind in alignment here with your body. Your body's sitting right here, you want your mind to sit right here, too. Don't go running and try keep everything balanced. Keep the breath balanced. Experiment a bit to see what feels just right. Just like a balance trying to end its point of an even keel, it'll lean a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, but just enough so that you eventually know what's straight up and down. Then try to keep it there. This is our point of normalcy. The mind at ease in the present moment, just being aware. For most of us, that's not normalcy. Our normalcy is something else, thinking about all kinds of things all the time. But that's the normalcy of someone who's bent over or whose body is out of alignment, so try to bring things back into alignment. After all, this is the middle path and this is the middle. Right concentration with its requisites of all the factors of the path. This evening I was looking at a little video clip on Buddhism in Thailand, and the narrator was a guy from England, who at the very end of the show says, obviously, Buddhism in Thailand is facing a crisis point. On the one hand, there is rampant materialism, and on the other hand, there's moral purity. He had been to a forest monastery, and that was moral purity. He said, of course, as good Buddhists, we should all envy the spot in between. What does that mean, though? The spot in between. There is the phrase, just the right amount of wrong, but that's the advertising slogan for a casino hotel. And as Ajahn Mahabua says, the dilemmas have their sense of what's just right, too. Right in the middle of the pillow, right in the middle of all kinds of activities that actually are pulling you out of alignment. What you want is the Buddha's middle, and it may be a little bit hard to get used to if we've broken precepts in the past, or if our life is involved in a lot in greed, aversion, and delusion. It's like any process where, say, you try to get your body into alignment. You go for a treatment, and the RST couple of times it's hard to keep things in alignment after the treatment. You end yourself going back to your old ways of walking, sitting, etc. But if you keep at it long enough, you begin to realize that this new middle here, the new alignment, is actually a lot better, and you're more inclined to try to maintain it. So even though it may feel unusual at RST, you begin to gain a sense that this is the point of just right. As for what happened in the past, what you did in the past, remember the Buddha's statement that someone who used to be heedless and then becomes heedful, illumines the world in the same way that the moon at night, when it's released from the clouds, illumines the world below. In other words, don't let the clouds get in the way of your new brightness. They may come back a little bit, but you realize, okay, this is where you'd much rather be, and over time it does become your point of normalcy. So think of yourself sitting here with the body perfectly balanced, your mind perfectly balanced, everything is in alignment, and try to get used to this new alignment. If there are any fears that you won't be able to keep it up, remember that it's natural for there to be some slips, but the more time you spend at it, the easier it becomes to recover from the slips. And again, as Ajahn Mahabua has said, the practice is not a chopping block waiting to execute those who give their lives to it. It actually gives you a deeper sense of well-being, a higher sense of well-being, a more secure sense of well-being. Regardless of what you thought were normal ways of practicing, normal ways of living, you come to see this state as true normalcy. This is balance. Or again, with Ajahn Lee. He said, look at the Buddha image in front of you. He's not disturbed by anything. People bring owers, he's not disturbed. If people created a mess here in the hall, he wouldn't be disturbed. Try to have that same sense as you're sitting here, both with regard to things outside and to things happening inside the mind. You want to end the point of awareness that's aware, and that's it. Knowing these things as they come, as they go, not getting thrown a balance. It's when you're not thrown a balance that you have a much better sense of what's up and down, what's right and left, what's something that should be done, what's something that shouldn't be done. These things become a lot clearer when the mind itself is clear and at normalcy. There was a famous Southern writer who was asked by a Northerner why Southern writers like to write about freaks so much, and she said, because we recognize one when we see one. In the same way, you want to have the ability to notice the freaks in your own mind and to recognize them for what they are. But to do that, you've got to side with the point of balance and normalcy. So keep working on making this your default position, the position to which the mind always returns. That's how you're able to set things straight inside. In the present. December 22, 2014. The verse we chanted just now, an auspicious day, is one of the few places in the canon where the Buddha talks about being in the present moment. Don't go longing after the past, don't go placing your expectations on the future, he says, but when he talks about the present, it's not just being in the present or accepting the present as it is, without any judgment. He says, 1. You clearly see what's happening, particularly in the mind. That's where you want to focus. And then 2, you do your duty with regard to what's coming up in the mind. So there's something you actually do. And when the Buddha talks about being in the present, it's always in the context of heedfulness. If you don't do your duties now, you don't know how much longer you'll have the opportunity to do them. But if you can do your duties now, you can end happiness surviving on the present, i.e., on the good things you've developed right here. The duties here, of course, come from the Four Noble Truths. If you see that there's any sewering in the mind, you want to comprehend it. If you comprehend it to the point where you can see what's causing it, then you want to abandon the cause, so that ultimately you can realize cessation, and you do all of this by developing the path. All the good qualities that need to be developed, which includes abandoning the things that need to be abandoned. So there are choices to make here. You're not just hanging out in the present moment to enjoy it or accept it. You're realizing that the present moment has consequences. It leads to the future, and you have those duties to keep in mind. That gives you a reference back to the past, so it's not just pure present awareness. There are states of concentration where things get narrowed down to a very precise time in the present moment, but you've got to maintain the concentration. It doesn't maintain itself, so even there's a duty. Other times, when the mind is not in concentration, you've got to go out. What do I need to do? What are my duties right now? Here at the monastery, things are pretty simple. You don't have too many connecting duties. We're all here for training the mind. There's work we have to do, but the work periods are not overwhelming. We don't have to multitask too much. All we have to do is focus on what we're doing right now, what we should be doing right now. This ties in with another passage where the Buddha says to remind yourself, days and nights, why past? What am I becoming right now? You become, of course, through your actions, so what are you becoming by the way you act? What kind of person are you turning into by the habits you're following, and is that the direction you want to go? This, too, points to the fact that the present moment is not an isolated moment. It builds on the past and it ows into the future. You focus on the present because you have a choice. You can continue owing in the way you're going, or if you don't think it's wise, you can change the direction of the ow. The Buddha gives a sense of urgency to being in the present by reminding you. Do your duty now, because who knows? Tomorrow may not come. Tomorrow may be death for you. In other words, you're in the present moment because you're heedful. Not because you want to enjoy how nice the present moment is, or to squeeze what little bit of pleasure you can out of it. You're here because your choices have consequences, and you've got this opportunity right now to make good choices that have good consequences. So what should you be doing right now? At the moment, you're focusing on the breath. If the mind slips you bring it right back. That involves the 3 qualities that the Buddha said need to be brought to the establishing of mindfulness. There is a popular belief that mindfulness simply means being in the present moment, but the Buddha never said that. Mindfulness is a quality of memory. You remember certain things, in this case, you remember your duties, and they're good duties. The duties assigned by the Four Noble Truths are there for the sake of your own true happiness. They're not arbitrarily imposed by somebody out there who just wants to push you around. They're taught by the Buddha because he saw that these are the most valuable things that human beings need to know, the most valuable duties they need to follow. So you keep your duties in mind, and then you bring in the second quality. Alertness. You're alert to what you're doing and what the consequences are right now. After all, sometimes the consequences don't wait until tomorrow or next week or your next life. They appear right now. If you spit into the wind, it comes right back at you. If you put your hand into a tree, you can burn it right now. So you're alert to look at what you're doing and to see what consequences you can detect right now. Sometimes nothing seems to be happening, and that's when you have to fall back on your memory to encourage you to stay and to remember that this practice takes time. The mind has been jumping around all day. You sit down, and it's going to want to continue jumping because that's its habit. This is where you have to bring in the third quality: ardency. If the mind jumps away, you just drop whatever it was following, and you end yourself back with the breath. And you try to stay here with sensitivity. The ear to be sensitive is also a function of ardency. This is where the pleasure in the present moment comes in as you try to stay with whatever pleasant sensations in the body you create through the way you breathe, through the way you perceive your breath. Think of the breath coming in and out through all the pores. It can go anywhere in the body, so wherever there's a sense of tightness or blockage, hold in mind the perception that allows your mind to believe, okay, the breath can go through the blockage, no matter how solid your bones or the pains or any other solid seeming parts may seem. There's a lot of space inside the atoms of the bones, so you can think of the breath owing through that space to create a sense of ease, fullness, refreshment throughout the body. The present moment is not a wonderful moment on its own. It's a good place to stay because you've learned how to make it that way with mindfulness, alertness, and ardency. You remember what to do with the breath, you've learned to remember to be alert to what you're doing with the breath, and you've learned how to be ardent in doing it well. At other times, when you're not meditating, there may be other chores you have to do. There are times when you do have to think about and plan for the future, times when you have to remember specific things that happened in the past, so you're not totally abandoning the past and future as you practice. But when you're sitting here doing concentration, you want your attention to be more and more totally right here, but still with that sense of mindfulness, of holding the right things in mind. If you lose your mindfulness, the concentration drifts into what Ajahn Lee calls delusion concentration, where you lose sense of where you're focused, where you are in time and space. When you come out, you wonder, what was that? Was I awake? Was I asleep? You're quiet and still, but there's no mindfulness, very little alertness, and no real ardency at all. Now, ardency doesn't mean that you have to sweat and strain. In fact, if you do a lot of sweating and straining, it's not going to be pleasant to be here. Ardency means that you're on top of things. What you're doing right now, what you should be doing right now. Are you doing what you should be doing? If not, what can you do to get the mind to want to do it? So the establishing of mindfulness is very intimately related to the duties of the Four Noble Truths. That quality of ardency is what carries out those duties. Mindfulness keeps those duties in mind. Ajahn Mun, toward the end of his life, when he was talking about his teaching style, commented that there were some things that he didn't reveal to everybody. He was very quiet about his psychic powers. We can now read about them in books and magazines everywhere, but when he was alive, he very rarely talked about them. He would mention them to students who were having similar experiences in their meditation, and the lesson was meant for them to apply the next time they met up with that kind of problem. But the teachings he said that he taught with an open hand to everybody were two. 1. The Four Noble Truths, and 2. The Four Establishings of Mindfulness. Those go together. The Four Noble Truths have their duties, and establishing mindfulness means using your powers of mindfulness to remember those duties, and to carry them through as you stay here with the breath, as you maintain this awareness of the present moment. There's no conflict between the two teachings. They're intimately related. We always have to keep that point in mind. Mindfulness isn't a state where you're not doing any duties. We're not here just to hang out in the present and enjoy the present moment and think that that's all there is. The breath here is part of the path described in the Four Noble Truths. Your concentration centered in the breath and mindful of the breath is part of that path. It's going to take you someplace if you keep at it. So try to keep these points in mind. That we're here to figure out what's our duty right now. Think. What duty needs to be done? I'll do it today. I'll do it right now, because who knows, I may not have this chance tomorrow. Or even a few moments from now. If we die, it takes a long time to get back to the practice. Think how long it took you in this lifetime to end your way to sitting right here, learning how to train the mind. If you're not careful, the next time around may be a lot longer than that. So you've got this opportunity right now. Focus on the right now because it's a place where the practice is done and where you can make a difference. That is what it means to be with the present. To see it clearly, and once you see clearly what's going on, to realize what your duties are right now. Then you do them. That's when being in the present moment is really auspicious. Remember this. January 16, 2014. One of the really useful qualities we're developing as we stay with the breath is mindfulness. If you're going to stay with the breath, you have to keep the breath in mind. As soon as you forget the breath, you're always someplace else. This training in remembering plays a huge part in the practice, and it bears repeating again and again and again, that mindfulness is remembering. It's your active memory. It's how you apply your memory to what you're doing right now, what you're experiencing right now, because there's a lot to remember about how to shape your experience skillfully, and in particular, how to shape it into the path. Usually when a thought comes up, it's your thought. If an opinion comes up, it's your opinion. A feeling, an emotion, a mood. The RST thing you think is, this is my mood, my feeling, or my opinion. We don't get to look at these things carefully in the Buddha's terms, as something separate, in and of themselves. We just ride with them, and we end up dealing with these thoughts and opinions in very unskillful ways, because of that framework of my. So we need a new framework, a different framework for looking at these things, and that's what we've got to remember. The Buddha said to look at the body in and of itself, feelings in and of themselves, feelings here, meaning feelings of pleasure, pain, and neither pleasure nor pain, mind states, which is where moods, emotions, and opinions all come in, and then mental qualities, species mental qualities that are skillful or unskillful, and go into making up mind states. In each of these cases, the Buddha gives you a framework for looking at these things in and of themselves, so that, for the time being, you can take away the mine, and instead look at these things as events, as part of a causal chain. Where do these things come from? Where do they lead? Take feelings, for instance. There are feelings of pleasure, pain, and neither pleasure nor pain. As the Buddha points out, in the abstract, there's nothing really wrong either with pleasure or pain. But there are species pleasures that are worth cultivating and species pleasures that are not. It's the same with pains. A lot of pains are totally useless. The Buddha gives an example of all the pain that went into the huge sacrifices kings and queens used to perform back in his time. They were painful in the doing and painful in the result. That kind of pain doesn't accomplish anything. Then there are pleasures. Some are worth developing, others are worth dropping. There's the pleasure of concentration. There's the pleasure of being generous. Those are skillful pleasures, pleasures worth developing. For, as he also points out, we're not here just watching things arising and passing away on their own because they don't arise and pass away on their own. There's an element of intention in how we shape our experience. Simply focusing on the breath, you're changing the feelings in the body. If you learn how to apply your attention to the breath in the proper way, you can create what the Buddha calls pleasure not of the esh. This doesn't happen on its own. There may be moments when it comes and goes, but you're not here just watching the moments. You're trying to develop the ease and pleasure that comes with being with the breath, to make it continuous. And that's a good pleasure, something worth cultivating. As for unskillful pleasures, the Buddha says you want to stay away from them because of their impact on your mind, and through that, their impact on your actions and the way you act other people. So this is the framework you're trying to remember when a feeling comes. It's not so much, it's my feeling, or I like it or I don't like it. The question is, where does this feeling lead? This brings your feelings and mind states into the realm of right resolve. As the Buddha said, the RST thing that really got him on the path was his ability to separate his thoughts into two types. those worth pursuing and those worth letting go. What was the distinction? Basically, the distinction was: where do these thoughts lead? What kind of intention is motivating them? Where does the intention lead? If the thoughts had to do with sensuality, ill will, or harmfulness, he would drop them, beat them down. Actually, because they led to addiction, either for himself or for others. That's part of right resolve. But if the thoughts were thoughts of renunciation, goodwill, or harmlessness, he'd allow them to roam around because they caused no addiction. That's right resolve, too. He said it was like watching over cattle during the dry season, when there's no danger of their getting into the crops. All you have to do is just be mindful. Okay, they're there. Remember that they're there. That was it. But he noticed that if you continued thinking in those ways, even if they were skillful, it would eventually tire the mind, and when the mind is tired, it's not only wearisome. It can weaken itself so that it can't keep its unskillful thoughts in check. That's why he brought the mind to concentration. The same principle applies to all the different thought patterns and mind states that can go through the mind. You have to guru out which ones you can allow to roam around, and which ones you've got to bring under control, and specifically, which kind of thinking is useful to get the mind into concentration. If your energy level is down and the mind is getting depressed, what can you do to lift your spirits? When the mind is wired and scattered all over the place with lots of frenetic energy, what can you do to calm it down? If the mind isn't concentrated, what can you do to get it concentrated? If the mind isn't in an expansive state, what can you do to expand it? These are the questions the Buddha has you ask. This is the framework you want to keep in mind. This is your frame of reference. This is where you want to establish your mindfulness. It's the same with mental qualities. The hindrances? You want to recognize. These are hindrances. Sensual desire comes up and, all too often, we don't think, this is a hindrance. We think, let's run with it. Thoughts of ill will come up. We can think of all the harm that other people have done us, and we can stew in that for quite a while, thinking that we're perfectly just yet and wanting to see those people sooner. The mind gets sleepy. You tell yourself, a sign that I'm getting drowsy. I'm getting tired. I need to rest. In other words, you side with the hindrances because they're yours. The Buddha wants you to take that little label of me and say, okay, look at this simply in terms of this framework, keep this framework in mind. If any one of these hindrances comes up, it's something you want to understand so that, through understanding it, you can drop it. This is where another main aspect of mindfulness practice comes in, which is ardency. What can you do to develop the skillful states, and what can you do to get rid of the unskillful ones? You want to keep that in mind. As well. Whatever lessons you've learned in the past, try them all out. And if nothing seems to work, then try to use your ingenuity to guru out what's wrong. Keep watching until you can see the connection between a particular mind state and what's giving rise to it, and then how you can cut it at the source. As for the factors for awakening mindfulness, analysis of qualities, persistence, rapture, calm, concentration, and equanimity, how do you give rise to them? How do you recognize them when they're there? Sometimes they come as just little seeds or little tiny sprouts. How do you recognize a moment of concentration, a moment of mindfulness? How do you recognize the potential for rapture? You want to look for these things. Learn how to recognize them and nurture them when they're there. When you're having trouble settling down, where in the body is there a sense of calm or serenity? If you're all tied up in tension, say, in your head, which part of the body is not tense? Focus there. It's like that old book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, which recommends, when you're drawing a face, instead of drawing the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, that you draw the spaces between the mouth and the nose, between the eyes and the nose, between the edge of the hair and the eyebrow, and so forth. In other words, focus on the spaces you tend to ignore. That you can draw much more accurate pictures because you don't let your preconceived notions of the shape of an eye or a nose get in the way. You don't have preconceived notions about the shape of a forehead or the shape of the space between eyebrows and eyes. Those are the areas where you tend not to focus. So by focusing on the areas where you tend not to look, there's a space, and you can draw the shape of that space with a fresh eye. You get a much better picture. It's the same with areas where there are bands of tension in the body. You don't focus on them, you don't connect them up, you focus on areas between them, where things are going well. The going well here may not be all that impressive to begin with, but if you give it some space, give it some time, it'll develop. One of the advantages of the kind of mindfulness practice that encourages you to be accepting and equanimous and patient is just that. You develop powers of patience and equanimity, so that when you can't gure something out, you have the patience to watch. And when you've gured out something and you know it's going to take time, well, you have the patience and equanimity to stick with it. But mindfulness practice doesn't stop with equanimity. Equanimity is simply one of the elements of the practice. Remember that mindfulness is the remembering and the framework you're trying to keep in mind so that you recognize, when something comes up in the mind, what you can do with it, for example, when it's skillful to be equanimous and when it's not. This way, mindfulness practice ties ultimately into the Four Noble Truths. Each truth has a duty. When something comes up, is it part of the truth of stress? Okay, remember. What do you do with stress? You try to comprehend it. You try to see where the clinging is, which particular aggregate you're clinging to, and then you learn how to depersonalize these things so that you can get the upper hand. Part of you may resist, thinking, well, this is me. These are my feelings. This is me, mine, whatever. But what's happened is these things have taken you over. You're enslaving yourself to these things. The clingings and the things that you cling to so much. Through your taking possession of them, they take possession of you. So what the Buddha's giving you is a framework for freeing yourself. It requires ear and ardency, but it's all to the good. It's in this way that mindfulness guides right-eared and leads to right concentration, and to all the other right elements of the path that take you to freedom. So remember this. Mindfulness is about remembering, holding a certain framework in mind, and then using that as a guide to what needs to be done with whatever comes up. And you're not just waiting for things to come up willy-nilly. You realize that certain things, when they come up, you have to let go. You have to get rid of them. Other things, when they come up, you want to encourage to keep them going so that they can grow. As the Buddha says, this is what it means to have mindfulness as your governing principle. Not just watching things coming and going, but realizing that some things, when they come, should be allowed to go really fast. In other words, you get rid of them as quickly and actively as you can. Other things, skillful things, that haven't yet come should be encouraged to come because they're helpful. If they don't arise on their own, you remember to make them arise and to try to keep them from passing away. So remember this, because this is the framework that helps you end freedom from all the things you used to lay claim to. But then, when you learn that you can pull away that label of me or my, you're not deprived. You're freed. In alignment with the Buddha's teachings, we underscore the tremendous significance of sharing wisdom widely. At present, we've converted this extensive 1,000-page work into a user-friendly audio format. The responsibility to advance this noble endeavor now lies with you. Through your subscriptions, likes, and the sharing of our content, you play a pivotal role in the widespread distribution of these teachings, benefiting countless others. Let's continue the age-old tradition of knowledge dissemination and the nurturing of mindfulness for the greater good of humanity. We wholeheartedly invite you to join us in this undertaking, and together, we can effect profound and positive changes in the lives of many.